Today I'm going to show you how to create this procedural copper. I'm not an expert on copper, but I tried to make some cool tarnish and some interesting displacement. And I created 3 different materials. The 2 on the left are the same, and the 2 on the right are 2 different types of displacement. The left materials are going to be more versatile as far as the types of mesh that they can be used on. The top right is more of like, if you wanted to create a piece of copper ore, and the bottom right is going to work better for use on a precise mesh, like maybe a copper pipe, or something you want to preserve the original shape of. It's not going to be too complicated, but it's not going to be too easy. This is what our end node setup is going to look like. I have a few announcements I want to make, but if you want to just skip them, you can click on the timestamp I've set up. I just want to say I'm really happy with the way things are going with my channel. My first year, I've been able to make an average of 1 video per week, which has been a lot of work, but I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the community as well. So it's been really awesome. I've also received a lot of support from people purchasing my textures, including people overpaying and leaving me tips. So if you're listening, I really appreciate that. It's a huge help to my motivation to keep going. I recently monetized my channel for about a week as well, but I watched one of my videos where I was talking quietly and a loud ad came on. I found it really annoying, so I demonetized my channel for now. That more closely aligns with my vision of how I want my channel to work anyways. And going forward, I want to make a nice material library and create something useful and widely applicable for those that choose to invest in me. I'll be making more physical materials like wood, tiles, maybe some dirt, grunge, scratches, other things that you can put to use in a variety of different projects. So let's just talk about copper for a second here. It's a reddish material and it reflects red and orange light. It's malleable and ductile, which means it can be reshaped and made into a wire if you want without breaking. It's also an extremely good conductor. In moist air, slowly forms a greenish film called patina, which actually protects the metal. So it's used in a lot of electrical equipment, construction like roofing and plumbing, industrial machinery and alloys. It's ideal for use in electrical wiring due to its high conductivity and ductility. It's a very common substance. So this is going to be useful for things like electrical components, maybe copper piping, stuff like that. To set up our scene, I'm going to hit Shift-D to duplicate this cube, then hit X to constrain it to the X-axis, and hold down Control so that it snaps from point to point here. And I'm just going to left click when I'm happy with the placement there. For this first cube, I'm going to hit S and then Z and 0.1 to size it along the Z axis, and then hit Enter. And I'm going to apply that scale with Control A, just click on Scale. I'm going to click on the modifiers panel on the right there and add a bevel modifier. The amount I'm going to set to 0.04 and the segments I'm going to set to 3. And it's either W or right click to bring up this context menu. Just hit Shade Smooth. For this second cube, go ahead and click on that and hit Control 4. That adds a subdivision surface modifier on there. And you can hit Control A while you're hovering over that as well. I'm going to hit Shade Smooth. It's not actually a complete sphere just yet. I'm going to add one more modifier. That's this Cast modifier. Then just set the factor to 1 and hit Control A, and that'll apply that. And now it's a complete sphere. Hit Shift A, let's bring in a plane, and hit S10 to size it up. I'm going to hit G and Z to move it down a little bit. Let's go a little further down. And then tab into Edit mode, hit 2 to go into Edge Select. Grab that back edge and hit E and then Z to extrude it straight upwards. Then grab this edge down here and hit Control B. We can bevel this, and use your mouse wheel to add more subsections there, more subdivisions, about this many. It'll be great. Tab back into object mode and hit W or right click, bring up this context menu and hit Shade Smooth. Let's also get rid of this light as well. We won't be using that. We're going to be using some HDRI lighting. So let's set that up as well. Go to World Properties and this yellow circle next to color, just click on that and select Environment Texture. Go to Open and find where you've got your HDRIs. If you don't have any, you can download some free ones from HDRIhaven.com. We're going to go to Keeley Interior. I've got the 1K. I find I don't really need more than 1K. Open that up, and then if we go into rendered mode, we can see that HDRI is basically all around us, and it's lighting our scene. It's just a really easy way to get nice lighting really quickly. Now that we got everything set up, let's change the entire middle area to the shader editor, and hit N to get rid of that shelf there. Then let's change the top right to the 3D viewport. Just make this a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and hold down Z, move the mouse up to go into rendered mode. And these should both have the same material. Just check that they do. And let's rename that Copper. Let's also switch to the Cycles render engine. Just come up here and switch from EV to cycles. And if you have a GPU, go ahead and select that as well. It'll be a little faster. This first material we can use in EV as well, but the second one, since we'll be doing some displacement, we want to be using cycles. Hit Shift A and bring in a Musgrave texture. Just place that here, and we can see what this looks like so far. In fact, I'm just going to get a bird's eye view of this. Hit Control T, it makes a texture coordinate and mapping node. Make sure this is coming out of Object and going to the mapping node. Let's also add a color ramp right after that Musgrave texture. Place it right there. We'll just line these up just like this, and let's bring the white down to 0.8. On the Musgrave texture, I'm going to change the scale to 6.5, the detail to 9.3, and the dimension to 0.1. And I'll leave the linearity as is. You can see it's already created this interesting gritty texture. Looks pretty cool all on its own. Hold down Shift and drag a right click through this noodle here just to create a reroute, because I'm actually going to duplicate these guys here. I'm going to duplicate them 4 times so we have 5 of these strands in total. Just like that. And then I'm going to add a noise texture, just slightly distorting this line right here, and a mix RGB right here. We'll plug this into color 2 there, and we'll set the scale at 0.6, so you know, quite a large pattern. And then this mix is going to be at 0.9. So very slight effect. If we look at this right here, we can just see a little bit of a waviness to it there. So if you watched my other metal videos, this setup is going to be fairly similar. Basically, we're going to have these 5 independent setups that are all kind of going to look like this here, and we're just going to add them all together. That's going to be our metal texture. So this first one here, we've got this white up here and this black one down here. This white one we can leave as is, but this black one we're going to have to change. And the reason being, if you're going to add all these together, the black just makes it too dark. So if I lighten this up a little bit, the end product is way better. So I'm going to lighten this up to 0.4 gray, and I'm going to leave this Musgrave as is, and then I'm going to change this X over here on the scale. I'm going to change this to 0.5, so we can see it stretches this texture just horizontally there. For this next branch here, let's take a look at it. It's this regular black and white one here. We'll start with this black value here. We'll change this to 0.45 gray this time. Then let's go to this mapping node and add 0.2 onto this Y. And this time we'll multiply the X by 2. So this time it's stretched vertically there. Let's take a look at the third branch now. I'm going to start by adjusting this black value on the color ramp. This time we'll change it to a 0.3 gray. So it's going to have a little bit heavier weighting than these other two at the top here. I'm also going to change this Musgrave pattern. We'll change this to 10 for the scale, and then we'll change the dimension to 3. So we have kind of a different pattern, kind of a smoother pattern, whereas the other ones were more gritty. Then we'll come to the mapping node and add 9 to the X, 0.4 to the Y, and then we're going to multiply the X by 0.2. So you can see we stretched it along the X-axis there. Take a look at the fourth one now, and we're going to change this black value on the color ramp to a 0.8 gray. So it's going to have probably the least weight of anything here. And let's adjust this Musgrave. Actually, no, we'll leave this as is. That's all going to stay the same. But this mapping node, we'll change the Y to 0.6 for the location. And the Z, we'll change this to 12. This doesn't really matter. This is just how to get the same texture as me. What really matters is if we change something in the scale there. But let's change the X to 4. So this is stretched, again, vertically there, along the Y-axis. Lastly, let's take a look at the last branch here. We'll change the black value here to a 0.6 gray. So a little bit less weight here, but not as little as this one right here. So this Musgrave texture will leave the same, but this mapping node will change the X to 8 and the Y to 0.7 under location, and then the X down here will go 6.8. Not sure why I chose 6.8, but for some reason I did, and it stuck there. So now that we've got all of these set up, I'm just going to move these to the side, and I'm going to bring in a math node. Place that here. Click here, and I can hit M, and that'll change it to multiply. I'm going to plug this top one into the top socket there, and this one is going to go into that socket there. So we can see if they're multiplied together, it forms this interesting gritty texture. It's this one plus this one, multiplied together, I guess, not added. And then we can do that again. If we place that here, we can just drag this into that bottom socket. You can see it's getting quite a bit darker already. We're going to need to lighten it up, but let's go ahead and just do this a few times so we can multiply all of these together. After this last multiply, let's add in a color ramp because I just want to lighten everything up here and just change the range. Let's bring this white down to 0.05. So it's a bit easier to look at now. Cool, complex, gritty texture with some horizontal and some vertical lines going through there. Next, I'm going to bring in another color ramp with Shift A, just search for color ramp. And I'm going to duplicate this a few times here, duplicate it 3 times in total, so we have 4 things here. This top one is going to be the color, this is going to be the metallicness, this is going to be the roughness, and this is going to be the bump map. We'll start by setting up the color with this top one. Let's just plug this into the base color on this principal BSDF. Make sure we're viewing this as well. Then let's turn the metallic up to 1. I downloaded a few reference images for copper that I'm going to use in the next part, but let's split this screen and change the left side to our image editor. Then I'm going to drag in an image from just a folder here, just of copper. I've got this copper wire here. Then if we hover over this color ramp where we set these flags up, you can hit E and it forms this eyedropper tool, and then you can drag this across any reference image there, and it'll set up these points. So just do that a couple times till you're happy with the result there. Next, I'm going to drag in a reference image for copper tarnish, and I'm just going to grab this last flag on the right here, and I'm going to hover over this part this time, hit E there, and then I'll just select something right here. Something like that. Looks pretty good. I'm going to close up this screen again here, and I'd like to fine tune the metalness, because right now, because this is set to 1, everything is metal here, including this tarnish, but I'd like to fine tune it so that the tarnish isn't metallic. So let's set this black at 0.395. And then we're going to bring this white right below it to 0.392. So this creates a map where basically 1 is where it's not metal, and, 1 where the white is where it's metal, and black is where it's not metal. And that's where the tarnish is going to occur there. So I'm going to plug this into metallic. Let's see what it looks like. Now we should see, the reflections, everything else interacting differently with that area there. Next, let's make a roughness map. And for this one, we're going to grab this black flag on this color ramp right here and set this at 0.64. Then we'll change this to, instead of black, we'll change it to a 0.55 gray. And this is actually the same setup that I'm going to use for this one down here. So I'm just going to delete that and just duplicate this here, save some time. So if we look at this roughness map right here, we can see basically the darker it is, the less rough it is, so the smoother it is. So this is going to be the most reflective area right here, and this area here is going to be pretty much non-reflective. And that's where primarily the tarnish is occurring. So if you plug this in to the roughness and take a look at this principal BSDF, we should see some reflections more so on the metal than on the tarnish. Last thing to set up is this bump down here. So let's bring in a bump node and just plug this into the height. And then I'll plug this into the normal right here. We can see it, it's pretty subtle. It just pushes up the areas where the tarnish is there. Basically, anything that's white is going to be more raised. Anything that's darker is going to be lower down. So if we wanted a more exaggerated effect, we could come over here to this flag and just darken this value. Or we could, I guess that would be it. I don't think you would want to change the strength to like 2, although I think you could. Looks pretty weird. But if that's what you want, I guess you could do that. So let's talk about some ways we could change this around. First of all, we could, do that color ramp trick as many times as we want. That's probably going to make the biggest difference because it's going to change what kind of, reds, oranges, or browns you have in this copper color. And copper can range from different colors there. I've seen from a lot of different reference images there. The other way you could change this around is by changing this color ramp, and it's going to change the amount of tarnish there. So if I were to drag this to the right, for instance, you can see the tarnish pretty much disappears, especially if I drag this black over. And if we drag this white way down, you have to get pretty close to like 0.02. 0.002, you can see it's completely covered in tarnish almost there. Another thing you could do too is come over to this noise texture and mix right at the beginning, and you could modify this slightly if you don't want such uniform, horizontal and vertical lines. You could go like this, and you just get some waviness there. You might want to try and disguise it a little bit more because it looks a little obvious what you're doing there, the noise texture, but you can make it more complex if you wanted detail or another noise texture or whatever. You could also modify the size of this scale here and change the waviness that way. You can see you get kind of like some interesting curves in here. I'm going to try and get another result from this color amp. So I'm just going to duplicate this one so I have a record of it. And let's go ahead, split the screen, change this to the image editor. And I'm going to grab a different reference image of copper this time. Hover over the color amp and hit E. And then I can drag this across, and let's see what we got. That looks pretty good. Let's try one more time. A few more times, I guess. That looks good. I'm happy with that one. Then I'm going to grab this far right flag. Actually, I'll just get rid of that one there, just to give it a bit more room. Grab that far right one. Just hover over here, hit E, and then sample this blue-green one here. So we get that tarnish again. Then I'm going to grab both of these, hit Shift D, and hit Y, take them straight into the Y axis, and hold down Control so we snap into place. I'm going to hit left click to set it right there. And let's select this one here. If you come to the top, there's this symbol that allows you to create a new material but keep everything that you've had here. But now if you change any of this stuff, it'll only change on this one here. So I'm going to call this Copper Disp. I'll do the same thing with this object down here. Let's click the same symbol, and this time we'll call this Copper Disp 2. For this next part, we're going to be doing some displacement. So I'm going to just come to the color material properties, I guess rather, and just scroll down to where it says settings, and then we're going to change where it says displacement. It says bump only. I want to change that to displacement and bump. Then come to the modifier panel. We'll set up a subdivision surface modifier. And just going to set that at 2. My final render, I did it at 6, but you get pretty good results even at 2 there. Let's zoom in a little bit here. For the displacement, I'm going to come out of Object. Let's go back to that there. And so I'm just going to create a reroute, just 2 of them here, by holding down Shift and right-clicking and dragging through there. And then this is, just basically an object output there. I'm going to bring in a noise texture, then place a color ramp right afterwards, and then I'll bring in a displacement node. I'll just put this right afterwards and make sure this is plugged into height. And then we'll run this into the displacement on that material output there, and we can look at that copper again. We can see this isn't the texture we want. We need to refine it a bit. The first thing I'm going to do is change the scale on this noise texture. I'm going to decrease it to 0.6, so we have a much larger pattern here. Let's just view this from the front here. And I'm also going to change this to 4D, so we have an option to change this W value. Just gives us a different seed each time, so we can, kind of generate different iterations of the same general idea here. We come over to this color amp. You can see if I bring the black up, kind of shrinks the object down and pushes out some areas. Similar thing with the white. It kind of makes it larger and pushes out some areas. I want to do both. I want to bring the white down to 0.7 and bring the black up to 0.2. Next, I'm going to add another noise texture just before this one I already set up in 4D. You can see when I put this here, it makes it really bumpy. So I'm going to bring in a mix RGB that just allows me to kind of control how much of this noise texture is going in here. If we bring it all the way to the left, it's like this mix RGB isn't even here. If we bring it all the way to the right, it's like this noise texture isn't even here. So first of all, I'm going to just bring it down to 0.7 so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to increase the scale to 10 and the detail to 3. So you can see all these little tiny bumps all over my object now. It's a little too much, so if I drag this to the right, it becomes less and less. I'm going to bring it all the way up to 0.98. So it's very subtle now, but you can still kind of see it, these little bumps everywhere. Next, I'd like to create some holes all over this object, and to do that, I'm going to grab this noise texture here and hit Control-Shift-D, duplicate it while it's still attached to everything here, and I'll just move all of this stuff just a little bit down, give myself a bit more space. With this noise texture here, I'm going to change it to 4D. I'm going to change the scale to 2, and the detail I'm going to change to 6. So we can look at this here. It's a pretty large frequency noise texture, but it's got some detail in there as well. Now I'm going to bring a color ramp in here, place it right here, and just move these a little closer together. The black is going to come up to 0.29, and the white is going to come down to 0.45. Then I'm going to bring in a math node, place it right after here, because we're going to add these both together. Right now it's just adding 0.5 to everything. If I put this at 0, it's the same size again. And if I plug this into the top socket, you can see it goes kind of crazy. There are holes in it, but this thing has become much too big. So I want to lessen the effect of this color ramp here that's putting these divots into my object. To do that, I'm going to duplicate this math node, place it right here, and change this to multiply. Then I'm going to change this to 0.11, so it's much smaller now. Let's look back at our original object and just see what the difference is. Now we've got these holes here. If we wanted to, we could change the interpolation of this color ramp to say something like B-spline. We can see much softer edges at the edge of these holes on our object. I found pretty good results with linear, so I'm just going to leave it like that for now. Next thing I'm going to do is create a mask to just allow us to separate the green tarnish and the copper material there. So I'm going to duplicate this color ramp here actually, and just use this. We're going to move these flags slightly closer together. This one is going to be 0.37, and this one actually is going to go up a tiny bit to 0.47. I found that gave me a pretty good result. I'm going to duplicate this principled BSDF here and mix them together with Control, Shift, and right-click and drag from one to the other. And it just forms this quick mix shader. I'm going to move this down here because I'm going to do something to it. But this guy, we're just going to plug this right into the factor here. And this is actually backwards. You can see, it's not interacting with it correctly. I'm going to switch these, and now you can see the tarnish appearing in some spots. Fortunately, it doesn't just appear in those divots. I'm still kind of working out the issues with using displacement and having an accurate mask. But this is pretty good here. I'm just going to do a few more adjustments just to make it look a little bit more like my original. And change the distortion on this bottom noise texture that we set to 4D to 0.5. Then I'm going to come over here to the displacement and change the mid-level from 0.5 to 0.7 rather. Here we go. And then another thing I did too is I moved these two spheres a little closer to here and changed my camera angle, just rotated on the x-axis just to get it a little bit more similar to my original picture. And while we're on the topic, at some point I did rotate everything by 90 degrees, so you can see my X, Y, and Z positive directions there. Just make sure yours is lining up the same way if you want the exact same result as me. I want to create an actual tarnish material for this principled BSDF here. And I also want to create a bump map add-on just coming from this right here. So I'm just going to duplicate this bump map and add my color into, not the normal, into the height there. So we can kind of see the bump map it's creating here. And I'm just going to plug this into the normal on this other bump map. I'll leave it at 0.5. And if we look at this, we can see both bump maps added together now, which looks pretty cool. So let's look back at our mix shader there. It's starting to look a little bit better. Let's set up this tarnish color at the bottom here. You duplicate this noise texture with Control-Shift-D. That's the one we left at 3D there. And I'm going to come out of Factor and just add in 2 color ramps. If you recall, this is all going back to this node reroute point here, which is all going back to Object on this texture coordinate right here. Just make that a little easier to see. And so this top one is going to be our color, and this bottom one is going to be a bump map. So let's set up the noise texture here. I'm going to just set it to 150, and I'm going to change this detail back to 2. For the tarnish color on this color ramp, I'm just going to go up to this one up here, and I'm just going to hover over here and hit Control-C, and then come back down and hit Control-V right here. And that'll just copy this in here. I'm going to do the same thing with this one here, because I'm just going to make this one a little darker, just see what it looks like. This should be 150, not 15. And you can play around with these until you get the result that you like. I think I'm happy with this. I think that looks fine. And then this color ramp right here, I'm just going to bring the black up to 0.57. If we look at that, we can see it's basically going to have all these white areas just pushed out a little bit. I'm going to bring in a bump map, place it right here, and make sure this is heading into the height there. And let's run this into the normal, and then let's run this into the base color. Let's make sure metal is turned down to 0, because this is not going to be a metallic substance. And we might as well just turn roughness up to 1. Let's see what that looks like when we run out of this mix shader. Yeah, looking great. Looking a lot like my original texture there. I think the copper color is just off a little bit. To fix that, you would just come over here and just try color picking this a few times, just like we did before earlier in the video. Got this all set up. Let's look at how we might change it around. So first of all, as I mentioned, just do a color pick here. And you'll change the color of this whole copper here. If you wanted more tarnish too, just come over to this color ramp that kind of separates both things. And just drag this white down. So if you go down to like 0.05, oh no, that's where it is, 0.01. There we go. Yeah, you're going to have a lot more tarnish there. And as you can see when you rotate around here, there is some spots where there's tarnish where there isn't a divot. Like I said, it's a little tricky to mask out two textures when you're also doing some noise displacement there. You can do it when you're doing 2D noise displacement, but if you're doing 3D noise displacement, that can be quite tricky. So anyways, I'm going to just set that back at 0.05. And then if you wanted to change the displacement at all, you could cycle through these seeds that are set up on these two noise textures here. This is going to change, just where those like larger bumps are. And then this is going to change where the bumps kind of going into the object are, like the divots into the mesh. Let's take a look at the last texture here. And we're just going to be doing the displacement on this guy as well. So I'm going to run out of object for this guy. I'll just make a reroute point. That was holding down shift and just right clicking and dragging through my noodle there. You just kind of get these reroute points. You can move them around, make things a little easier to see. So this is essentially going back into the object output of the texture coordinate node. I'm going to set things up similarly to how I did last time, just by bringing it in a noise texture, a color ramp, and a displacement node. I'll just put that here and make sure that's going into height. For some reason, it kind of defaults into the normal. So then we plug this into the displacement right here, and we can view this. Something's not going quite right. We still need to come down to the material properties and scroll down to where it says settings. And under displacement, just change that to displacement and bump. And now it's actually going to display stuff. Let's make sure we have a subdivision surface modifier on here as well. I'm going to go ahead and apply this bevel modifier. And let's bring in a subdivision surface. And I'll just set this at 3 or maybe 4 for now. It doesn't really matter. We can always adjust that for our final render, get some more detail if we want. So right away we see kind of the same thing happening. There's too much displacement and the noise is too small as well. We also have to be careful about one other thing, because the edges are closer together with this mesh. We can get some overlapping like we do here if there's too much displacement. So, usually I just try and avoid most of it. Sometimes you can't avoid all of it, but it's just something to be aware of. Let's set up this noise texture. I'm going to change it to 4D and actually come out of this factor. It's going to have the same kind of noise texture coming out. It's just going to be a different version. Depending on which one you come out of. So if you want yours to look exactly like mine, just come out of the factor, but it really doesn't matter. I'm going to leave this W, actually I'm going to change it to 1, and change the scale to 2, and then change this detail to 3. Then I'm going to come to this color ramp and change this black to 0.27, and this white, I'm just going to leave it at the top, but I'm going to change it to a 0.95 gray. So to do that, I'm just going to scroll with my mouse wheel, and you can just see this dot. Just lowers down a little bit. Now this value is at 0.95. I'm also going to add another noise texture just further up the line here. So I'll just bring one in and bring in a mix RGB so I can control that noise texture's influence on this second noise texture. I'm going to plug this reroute into color 2. This one here, why don't I change this to 4D as well? That's what I had in my original. And I'll change this scale to 10, and the detail is going to be 4. And then I'm going to come over here to the factor, and I'm going to change this to 0.6. So it's still looking pretty crazy. It's going to help when I do this next step, because I'm just going to basically say, I don't want this everywhere. I only want it in certain spots. And to do that, I'm going to use a noise texture. So why don't I just duplicate this guy here with Control-Shift-D, so it remains attached to this, reroute right here. And then I'll change, or I'll come out of the factor rather, and I'll bring in a color ramp. Place it right here. Then I'm going to change this bottom one to 0.54, and this top one is going to be at 0.65. For this noise texture, I'm going to change the W to 0.3. I'm going to change the scale to 2. And I'm going to change the detail to 4. I guess it already is at 4. So I'm just going to leave it as is. That's great. I'm also going to change these values on the color ramp. This black, I'm going to change it to a 0.995 gray. So I'll just enter in 0.995 into that value when I'm on hue saturation value. And this white, I'm going to change this to a 0.35 gray. Then I'm going to add in one more point by clicking this plus sign here and just bring it to the right. This is going to go at 0.83, and I'm going to change this all the way to white. Then I'm going to bring in a mix RGB. We can either mix them together like this by holding down Control-Shift, right-clicking and dragging from one to the other, or we can just search for one. It doesn't really matter. And this is going to plug into the height on that displacement. I'm going to switch some stuff around here, so let's open this up. This top one, this bottom color ramp rather, is going to go into color 1. And this top color ramp is going to go into the factor, just like this. And we'll leave this at 0.75. I found that gave me the best result. So let's take a look at our principle BSDF here so we can see what's going on. It's basically creating these divots here, and we want the tarnish to appear in these divots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a color ramp and just place it right after here. And let's change this. We'll do the black at 0.44, and the white is going to come down to 0.5. So they're fairly close together, but you can see some gray areas in there where the gradient still occurs there. I'm going to duplicate this bump node, which, by the way, I don't know why this is still at 1. This should really be at 0.5 for all of them. So let's go back into this material here. Just change these to 0.5. Back in this one here, we're going to run this color ramp into the height. We'll run this into the normal on this first color ramp, and I'll change this one to 0.5 again. So we can see this first bump node. It creates this one, these bump areas here, and also this subtle surface bump here, and then added together with this, also that tiny grunge from the tarnish there. I'm going to grab that tarnish material that we created right here. No sense in creating it again if we don't have to. It's just going to be these 5 nodes here. I'm just going to hit Control-C. We'll go into here, and there we go. We've got it set up already. So I'm just going to attach it to that object there. And this is going to be our mix shader factor decider here. So I'm just going to mix these together and run this color ramp into the mix shader right here. And let's take a look. So it's backwards. Just got to mix those the other way around. And there we go. We got our copper. So you can see we get a bit of that overlap that I was talking about here. Why don't I decrease this scale to help fix that? I'll bring this down to 0.6. That should be a bit better. You might still get a little bit. You can play with that number if you want, but I think this looks pretty good. To change this, you're going to do it the same way as you did the other one. This noise texture is going to have the biggest effect. If you change that W value, you're going to get different seeds that just change where those divots are occurring. So that's pretty cool. You could also change this right here, this map, and increase or decrease those divots. If you drag this further to the right, it's going to really decrease those divots. You could also come up here to this color ramp that kind of separates everything and drag this white to the left there, and maybe it's 0.01 or something like that. You get a lot more surface tarnish. So let's put that back to 0.05. And you could also come up to this color ramp here and repick this color like we did earlier. That's really going to change a lot as well. It might also be useful to add a vector math node right here. So why don't I go ahead and hit Shift, right click and drag through here, and I'll create a reroute here bring in a vector math, place it here, and I'll just change this to scale. And then if we wanted this pattern to be bigger, we could just lower it below 1. If we wanted this pattern to be larger, we could go like 2 or something like that. So if you decide this is too big or too small, really easy way to change it around. Let's also quickly talk about what these materials are useful for. The two on the left are going to be the most versatile. They can also be used in EV really easily because there's no displacement. The top right, it's going to be hard to use it on a lot of meshes because it's going to be a lot of displacement going out with these bumps, and then these divots as well are going to be created. But this bottom right is nice if you want to use it on like a pipe or something that you want to kind of preserve the integrity of the mesh. It's going to work a lot better. You can see the example right here that I did earlier in the video. This is the copper displacement 2 working there. So copper displacement 1 wouldn't work nearly as well. So that's it. Thanks for checking out my copper video, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting me by buying my textures on Gumroad and Patreon. It really does mean a lot. I plan to continue making these procedural videos as I have no shortage of ideas. My only limiting factor right now is time I can devote to these projects, but hopefully that'll change. Thanks though, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.